It was once the healing of the nation until it became the enemy of the state. A plant pulled from the soil and pushed into courtrooms. Once sacred, now suspect. Once smoked in silence, now discussed in Parliament. In Saint Lucia, cannabis didn't simply go up in smoke. It was squashed by colonial fears, chopped down by local law, and buried under decades of stigma, sentencing, and shame. But now, the same state that once raided fields and locked up lockhead users is drafting policy, setting standards, and courting investors. How does a nation criminalize culture, then regulate it for profit? How do we tell young men they were wrong just before turning their crime into an industry? And who holds the license, not just to grow, but to rewrite the narrative? From locked cells to legal sales, from dreadlocks cut with cutlasses to products tracked by barcodes. The journey of cannabis in Saint Lucia is not just ironic, it's instructive. This isn't just about weed, it's about justice, power, memory, and money. Untold Stories presents Cannabis, from prohibition to permitted use.
Shock attack, and team come down, turn your back. Because me sweeter than the water with a coconut. Me nicer than the lollipop. But watch a man, the eye and the
weed, the chronic, ganja, pot, the bud, Mary Jane. This plant has been referred to by many names, but many know it by its sordid sobriquet, marijuana. In early American medicine, it was known by its rightful name, cannabis. But by the early 20th century, that name and the truth it carried was smothered by fear, politics, and prejudice.
Cannabis is a family name of a plant, of which there are really three main species: the Cannabis sativa, Cannabis indica, and Cannabis ruderalis. Marijuana is a name, a derogatory name, which was developed in the United States, in particular, and probably born more in the southern United States, based on Mexican and African American use of cannabis, which the authorities launched a campaign pointing out that this substance was causing these populations to be exceedingly violent and become rapists, and therefore of especially white women, they were saying, but white people in general.
What followed was no reform. It was a cultural takedown. At its center stood Harry Anslinger, America's first drug czar. Backed by media titans and political allies, he ignited a propaganda war, flooding the public with tales of reefer madness, violence, and moral decay.
Suicide.
The word marijuana itself was weaponized, a linguistic smokescreen designed to erase cannabis's medicinal past and brand it as a national menace. In 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act passed. Overnight, cannabis became criminal. Possession, sale, and prescription were technically allowed, but only with tax stamps that were never issued. The law ignored medical authorities like the American Medical Association. A pharmacy staple became a felony, a healing herb became contraband, and a tax law became the trigger for a global war, one that would soon spill far beyond U.S. borders. As the 20th century marched on, Caribbean nations, many fresh from colonial rule, were pulled into this American-led crusade. Under U.S. and British pressure and through binding international treaties, countries like Saint Lucia, Jamaica, and Trinidad adopted Western drug laws. Cannabis was criminalized without cultural dialogue, scientific basis, or public consent. This alignment hardened with the birth of CARICOM in 1973. Western-backed initiatives like the Regional Drug Law Enforcement Training Center poured in funding and training. Raids escalated. Prosecutions surged. What was once folk remedy and spiritual sacrament was now a legal threat. Yet, across the Caribbean, cannabis, ganja, remained rooted in Rastafari belief, rural survival, and ancestral healing. But the law did not yield to culture. It crushed it.
Now you look for that because but any happen on me. Any it's an offense. It's an offense to happen, you know. Any control job. Do you know that, right? You should. You know that, right? Are you aware of that? I hope I'm not gonna come right you can be arrested for it. Do you know that, right? Right. But in this letting with I'll caution you. Okay? I'll allow you to go. But if you get caught, if you get caught, you'll again be arrested. Okay? All right. Okay.
Oh yes, many friends of mine, they beard right in Cass Street and on Grass Street. Yeah, when the police pass, they would get a sharp cutlass and pass it in your head. Just remove your locks, cut your beard.
And we would cut these guys' hair, you know. Well, they were really treated badly in the first instance.
Why would you all cut their hair?
No, because there was no regulation, there was no direction. You know, the idea was that it was something that was considered anti-society. If a guy grew locks, it meant that he was a social outcast, whether he believed so or not. He would not get employment, you know, the rest. He would be sent out of school and, you know, things of that nature, because it would mean he was smoking and blah, 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 blah. But all these reactions were what the rest of society thought of it.
We felt we had the right to smoke if we wanted to, anywhere we wanted to, even though it was not legal. So we did get into problems with the law.
In Saint Lucia, like much of the region, this prohibition was never homegrown. It was imported, packaged in American fears, and sealed with diplomatic pressure.
Last year alone, over 10,000 drug criminals were convicted, and nearly $250 million of their assets were seized by the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration.
1990 drug budget totals almost $8 billion.
St. Lucia's story reveals what happens when small nations inherit big fears and how global politics turned a plant into a symbol of punishment. It wasn't about weed. It was about power. In the early 1970s, Rastafarians in St. Lucia were brutally persecuted by state authorities who saw their Afrocentric identity, spiritual use of cannabis, and rejection of colonial norms as a direct threat to societal order. Gerald Cyril led several operations to manage the scourge of Rastafari and weed.
These operations were to prevent them from destroying the forests, and there were laws that make marijuana a dangerous drug, we were told, and that we have to try our best to keep it away from the youths coming up. And then the problem begins where the Rastafarians wanted to rebel against us, but it was our duties to conduct those searches and then to uproot those plantations. Because in the early 70s, the first marijuana plantation, it was about 39 trees. It's just down in Roseau Valley, close to the river between Marigot and Roseau River there. And it was a guy who used to reside in Trinidad. Edmund, better known as Trini, and he was the very first man to be charged with the cultivation of marijuana in Saint Lucia. I think he was charged, maybe $300 and something or $500.
When I just was growing my locks before I went to medical school, that was probably 2000, 2001, in Vieux-Fort. I was driving and I had a spliff. At that time I was using a spliff. I was very young. And the police just came on me. That's in Vieux-Fort. Like a big police van, big gun, like one spliff, and then I had my girlfriend at the time and my firstborn child, right? She was about a month or two. I was like a proud father, and they had like a spliff in the vehicle. And they came in and, and took me in, brought me to court right away. The magistrate charged me. I think it was $300 or $500.
Before 2021, cannabis possession, even small amounts, could lead to imprisonment in Saint Lucia. The law focused on deterrence, penalizing use and trafficking, particularly amongst youth and marginalized communities. While sentences varied depending on quantity and intent, some offenders served substantial time behind bars. Horace Fraser served as a magistrate from 2001 to 2004.
I remember we had a regional magistrates conference in Antigua sometime 2001, 2002, and that was a program which was funded by the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency, and they were pushing us to imprison people for cannabis offenses. They were saying that the drug trade is festering and fostering because we just imposing fines rather than imprisonment. And they were saying if we imprison people, then we'll have less trafficking. But I pointed them to the fact that in Guyana, 1 ounce of marijuana was 3 years jail. And that was a heavy transshipment point. Guyana's always been so. It was not a deterrent because the drug trade was a lot of money. I recall a young man who came before me with possession and possession to supply, and he was given a fine. And 3 weeks after, he appeared in court again for the same offenses. And when he was asked to explain why he reoffended, he said he was hustling to pay the fine that I put on him. So my thing was, don't bother to pay the fine. I will put you up on this one. You're going to have to pay a fine for this one. I'll put you up. I give him 2 months, which is a different scenario. That's the only person I remember sentencing, because you come to the court and tell the court you're doing this to pay a fine, which is a slap in the court's face. So we can't allow that kind of conduct. So I had to put him up.
When we return, Emma Hippolyte is caught on camera in a ganja field.
Infused is Saint Lucia's premium brand for cannabis users. The most flavorful way to roll, light, and relax. From rolling papers to accessories and fresh island apparel, Infused caters to all your high vibes. Slow, clean burn, pure hemp, bamboo, or bold flavors, crafted for the Caribbean lifestyle. Grab a pack. Spark your moment. Infused. Roll, light, smoke, relax.
The answer is just like a natural gift that, you know, we have been able to extract out of nature in such a way that people can use it. Yeah, and in many different ways I'll use it. Use it in juice, you know, drop it in your juice same way. And, you know what I mean, in tea, same way. All different type of ways I'll use it, you know. Most times I take it in water, you know what I mean? Like, but, you know, if you're ever on the road and you need to sanitize your hand, like, you know what I mean, with something that, you know, is like antibacterial at the same time, you know, that is one of the things they can use the answer for, you know. It's for people who undergo and people who are trying to incorporate the natural levity into everyday modern life, you know what I mean? So it's a gift. You know, we give thanks, it's an answer, you know, for real.
The wait is over. We finally received our new shipment of assorted used Japanese auto parts. The hard-to-find Toyota Aqua parts, the largest variety of Noah, Alphard, Hiace, Swift, and Vitz parts have arrived. Now Autodomain has the largest stock of used automatic transmissions, engines, and body parts for all the Japanese imports, especially the newer models. Best of all, we've moved to Massad Gruzile, directly behind the 24-hour gym to serve you better. Need a part? Call us today. Telephone 584-2621.
Early opposition to cannabis use, particularly in the Caribbean and globally, was rooted in a combination of public health concerns, colonial-era moral panic, and emergent psychiatric theories. Authorities and medical practitioners feared that cannabis use, especially amongst young men, was directly linked to mental illness, citing cases of schizophrenia, psychosis, and violent breakdowns in users. This concern was magnified in small island societies where mental health resources were limited, and any perceived rise in psychiatric admissions was met with alarm.
From my experience, I do not see a significant correlation, and actually in some persons with anxiety disorders, for example, cannabis, some of the cannabis products do help them deal with the symptoms. Some persons with depression, anxiety may help deal with their symptoms. Some persons with sleep disorders, and cannabis may help them deal with their symptoms. So I have not seen an increase. I have not seen a direct correlation in all of the cases. Yes, there are some cases where you do have a direct correlation, but it is not in, cannabis doesn't cause psychosis nor schizophrenia. And that has been proven through research and through my professional experience as well.
But the question still remains, why do people use cannabis, considering all the opposition, legal impediments, stigma, discrimination, not to mention the fines and possible incarceration?
Recreational substances are not a problem in and of themselves. You know. It is the use of the recreational substance. It is actually what we call the common liability theory. The problem, people get into trouble with substances because they have an inherent problem that substances are being used to make them feel better, to distract themselves and to help them to cope with the internal problems. So the problem is never really the substance. The problem is the person who needs to now abuse the substance because they have a particular set of problems internally, psychosocial problems, mental health problems. And those problems is where we should go. Indeed, as a physician, I like to talk about root causes of problems. And you must always look for the root cause of the problem that you're dealing with. And the root cause of substance abuse, be it cannabis or alcohol or any other substance, is the individual who is abusing the substance.
Cannabis has emerged as a powerful therapeutic tool, offering effective relief for a range of chronic and life-altering conditions. It is used to manage persistent pain, especially in cases of arthritis, cancer, and nerve damage, and CBD is FDA approved for severe epilepsy. THC-based medications combat nausea, and appetite loss in cancer and HIV patients, while both THC and CBD alleviate muscle spasms, tremors, and psychiatric symptoms in conditions like multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, PTSD, and anxiety. Cannabis also reduces inflammation in Crohn's disease and autoimmune disorders such as lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. Beyond symptom control, it supports opioid recovery and insomnia treatment, making it one of the most versatile and impactful plant-based medicines in modern healthcare.
There are people who have intractable problems that our current set of pharmaceuticals don't allow us to truly ameliorate or help mitigate. And cannabis has a role to play in some of these. I'll give you a classic example, which I found quite fascinating. Agitated dementia in older people. These are people who, yes, they're demented, they have dementia, and they are violent, they're aggressive, they're not sleeping, they're all over the house, they're creating great disturbance in the house. Cannabis has a role in people like that. People who have chronic pain that is not being ameliorated properly, and they're having to use lots of not only non-steroidals, but even opioids, narcotics, which have their complications. Cannabis can be used. In fact, it is shown, in the United States has shown this, nowadays they're embracing it, right? It used to be marijuana, now it's cannabis in the United States. Hey, what to do? Life moves on. But anyway, they are showing that you can reduce opioid use when you bring pharmaceutical cannabis to bear with certain people with certain conditions.
We find that the most effective way of utilizing cannabis is a whole plant extract, which would be the ancient way of pounding it with a mortar and pestle and then extracting the juices from it. That's the buds, the seeds, the leaves, the bark, and every aspect of it, and allowing the patient to actually drink that. But if we have a patient that is in intense pain and cannot sleep, probably we do more an ethanoic extract, or steam distillation and extract the oils, the terpenes, plus also the cannabinoids from the plant in a very concentrated form, and probably give them a drop on the tongue or under the tongue to allow them to calm down. And also we do what we call rectal insertions for people with prostate cancer or people who have is terminally sick with cancer, and we want to give them a large dose of the oil. That you cannot do for the mouth because it's very psychoactive.
Saint Lucia's march towards cannabis reform began in earnest in July 2019 when Cabinet established the Saint Lucia Cannabis Commission to probe the social, economic, and health dimensions of marijuana and craft a modern policy blueprint. The multi-stakeholder body comprising traditional cultivators, Rastafarian leaders, physicians, economists, and law enforcement officials presented economic impact studies and draft regulations to ministers, urging that decades of prohibition had clogged courts, stunned small farmers' livelihoods, and criminalized cultural practice. Andre De Keres, a longtime proponent of cannabis decriminalization, led the charge.
It actually started with Mr. Hermingale Francis. The UWP decided that they would decriminalize or look at the reformation of cannabis laws. And I saw Mr. Hermingale Francis one night on the television saying that they were going to legalize cannabis. And I went in the media the very next night and said, how could he say that? You're all just saying that, and we have an advocacy group, we have the cannabis movement, we've been advocating, and you're all out of the blue just... And he saw me being visibly upset in that news media. He had some personal business to deal with and handed over the baton to Mr. Bradley Felix. And actually, Mr. Felix is the one that started the ball rolling. He actually had our first meeting with the CMO and Mr. Verngard. He was Commissioner of Prisons and PS, I can't remember which PS, and we had a great meeting in one of the government buildings, Mr. Bain and myself. We had another meeting with Mr. Felix, Bongo Wisely, Mr. Bain and myself. And as a result, he started the legal drafting of a bill.
Their recommendations underpin the cabinet-approved policy framework and a slate of amendments to the Dangerous Drug Act prepared by the Attorney General explicitly endorsing private possession limits, record expungement, and pathways for a regulated industry. Under Prime Minister Alan Shastney's administration, the government began exploring decriminalization. In March 2019, Shastney confirmed that Parliament was preparing amendments to allow personal use of small cannabis amounts, 30 grams or less, citing falling arrest rates as a driver for reform. After years of persecution, fines, imprisonment, stigma, and discrimination against persons who consumed, cultivated, and celebrated cannabis, with a stroke of a pen and a vote in Parliament, the era of prohibition was over, making way for the permitted use of cannabis. In August 2021, Parliament unanimously passed the Criminal Records and Rehabilitation Amendment Bill, scrubbing convictions for anyone caught with less than 30 grams of cannabis. 1 month later, on September 14th, legislators amended the Misuse of Drugs Act to decriminalize that same threshold, allow for up to 4 homegrown plants, and replace arrest with small fines for public use, accompanied by a formal apology to the Rastafarian community. With Prohibition's core dismantled, government pivoted to economic development. A cannabis task force drafted commercial production rules, and in 2023, the Regulated Substances Authority's bill advanced through Parliament, creating a licensing agency and opening the door to medical, industrial, and boutique recreational markets guided by international best practice. But the passing of this bill was not without its challenges.
I would say societal change, mindset changes. Persons were accustomed to prohibition, and as such the movement towards permitted use is something strange to them. They grew up all their life being told cannabis is a drug and it's a hard drug and they should not do drugs and they should not use drugs. And as such, to change that mindset into understanding that cannabis has beneficial medicinal purposes and that cannabis use does not automatically equate to smoking cannabis was one of the harder contexts to get persons to move their minds around, that it can be used for pain management, for other uses, and that the mode of ingestion need not necessarily be smoking.
The Bureau of Standards served as the technical backbone of the cannabis reform legislation.
In 2019, the Saint Lucia Bureau of Standards launched an ad hoc committee to deal with cannabis. We knew that there was an intent for a cannabis industry, and as such we assisted by launching this ad hoc committee and participating in the Cannabis Commission and then the Cannabis Task Force, which occurred subsequently. We also were part of the steering committee for the development of the Regulated Substances Authority, and the Regulated Substances Authority is the entity under which the Cannabis and Industrial Hemp Act will fall under. We also assisted by ensuring the training of our technical staff for the development of cannabis standards through our partnership with ASTM. We also this partnership allowed for training for the Office of the Attorney General as well in developing the Cannabis and Industrial Hemp Bill.
Under the Cannabis and Industrial Hemp Act Bill 2025, Class 1 and Class 2 medicinal cannabis are defined by their potency and access requirements. Class 1 products are low THC formulations with strictly limited cannabinoid content, intended for general public use without a prescription. Class 2 products, by contrast, contain higher or specially regulated levels of THC and other cannabinoids and are only available to individuals who have a valid medical prescription.
Though we may decriminalize it or legalize it for medicinal, it is still going to be a very controlled drug. It is not going to be a free-for-all. Controlled, hard, so that to be able to dispense it, you have to be registered with the RSA. The same way for the pharmacies, they have to be not only just registered pharmacies, but they also have to be registered and licensed with the authority. Persons would have to register with the RSA, the Regulated Substances Authority, to be a Class 1 dispensary. Now, Class 2 dispensaries, these have to be registered pharmacies. These are the ones that will be dealing with the medicinal cannabis, those with high THC levels.
Under Saint Lucia's Cannabis and Industrial Hemp Act, every dose of Class 2 medicinal cannabis is tracked from seed to sale. Patients are registered, issued medical cards, and products are labeled and reported to the Regulated Substances Authority. This ensures that those with real medical needs get access while closing the door on black market diversion.
That is the way the world is moving towards the legalization, decriminalization of cannabis. So it's something that we as pharmacists, we were expecting. We are prepared for it, and we're prepared to help the public understand and to use it in a manner that is going to be safe and effective for them.
When the draft cannabis bill opened for public review in January 2025, the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards collaborated with the Regulated Substances Authority, the RSA, to weave these standards into licensing regulations, making compliance mandatory for licensed growers, processors, transporters, labs, and retailers.
To date, we've only developed 5 standards for cannabis. One for the quality management of the cannabis systems, the testing of cannabis to ensure that it is free from mold. The main testing standards for raw cannabis would be their water activity, which would indicate how much the potential to develop mold. So moldy cannabis becomes an issue once transported, similar to moldy sea moss, for instance. Dried sea moss should not develop mold or should be treated in a manner to minimize mold growth. So these are the key issues with regard to cannabis. The other issue is the testing of cannabis and cannabis-related products. So now persons need to know clearly what potency of the cannabis they're ingesting, what quantity of the ingredient of interest. And when we speak about cannabis, the only ingredient of interest that is specifically regulated internationally is THC.
When we return, a financial institution says yes to marijuana money.
Are you driving without a license? Have you been taking chances with the road? Are you dodging the police? Give yourself the best gift ever. Get yourself licensed today. Don't wait until you get caught by the police. Secure your future on the road. WhatsApp us now at 488-3899 for more information. Drive legally, drive safely, drive smart. Get licensed today with Kickstart.
At Labrie Cooperative Credit Union, we have one simple goal: to help you grow. Because when you grow, possibilities expand. We're about growing wings, growing ideas, growing you. This is your time, a time when your plans and dreams fall into place, when what you thought to be impossible with our support is indeed achievable. And best of all, it's a time when you can look back and see your growth. So, on life's journey, set your goals high. We'll be with you every step of the way. And as you grow, so should your opportunities. Labrie Cooperative Credit Union. We're not a bank, we're better. Telephone 459-6900.
It's been a long day without you, my friend, and I'll tell you all about it when I see you again.
How can we not talk about family when family's all that we got? Everything I went through, you were standing there by my side, and now you gon' be with me for the last ride.
Let the light guide your way. Yeah. Hold every memory as you go, and every road you take will always lead you home. Oh, it's been a long day without you, my friend, and I'll tell you all about it when I see you again.
With St. Lucia's Cannabis and Industrial Hemp Bill now law, clarity is critical. The line between decriminalization, legalization, and regulation isn't always obvious, and misunderstanding it could cost you. Here are 10 things every St. Lucian needs to know. Only medicinal and industrial activities are established by the law. Commercial activities under the law are limited to medicinal and industrial applications. Private cultivation only. Adults 21 and over may grow up to 4 plants for personal use, not in public or unsecured spaces. Public use remains prohibited. Smoking or consuming cannabis in public is illegal, even with a prescription. Minor violations can lead to tickets or fines instead of arrest. Medicinal cannabis comes in 2 classes. Class 1, low THC products require no prescription. Class 2, stronger products require both a prescription and a cannabis card. A Cannabis Advisory Council established in the bill will advise on what products should fall under each classification. Pharmacies only. Only licensed pharmacies may be issued Class 2 dispensary licenses and thusly be permitted to dispense Class 2 or the more potent cannabis products. Strict safeguards for youth. No one under 21 can use cannabis without a prescription. Such persons are also prohibited from handling or working in the cannabis industry. Offenses near schools carry heavier penalties. Licensing is mandatory for all activities. Cultivation, processing, transport, retail, export, and research must be licensed, tracked from seed to sale, and bear official government stamps. Taxes and labeling apply. Cannabis and hemp products may be taxed and must carry approved government labels and stamps. Sale of unstamped products are illegal. Local interests are protected. Central trading entities ensure involvement of traditional cultivators and sellers. Foreign investors must partner with St. Lucian cultivators, and small farmers are encouraged to form cooperatives to access the legal market. Driving under the influence is illegal. Cannabis and vehicles don't mix. It's criminal to drive or operate machinery while impaired. As St. Lucia moves from prohibition to regulation, the Regulated Substances Authority serves as the central body guiding the cannabis industry. It oversees every stage of the process, from seed to sale, by licensing growers, monitoring distribution, and enforcing strict tracking systems. By coordinating health, commerce, and enforcement, the authority ensures that cannabis remains accessible for legitimate use, protected from black market diversion, and managed with fairness and accountability.
We have a situation specific to cannabis where uninitiated students are being given a foil wrap at the back of a school and receiving advice on how they should consume that product by another student or friend on the block. If you do recognize that there may be a need for you to change that, the only means for you to change it is to address it head on. So you have to have a conversation, which you cannot have with an illegal substance that you're not supposed to touch at all. If you want me to understand why I should not touch it, or if I should touch it, how I should touch it, how I should come to administer this, then we have to have that open dialogue, and only a legalized framework allows for that conversation.
The regulator's Substances Authority, the RSA, launched a series of national consultations starting in January 2025 to ensure the legislation was informed by broad stakeholder input.
Being candid, they've been challenging. So we have had, over the last 6 months, many requests for meetings with some of these stakeholders, and found that they were not as receptive as we would have wanted. There is still the general view that we should not be changing the regime for cannabis. Why are we doing this? There's more important things to be done. And because of that, it took quite some time for stakeholders to come around to actually review the bill, to understand that this is happening, and you really want to have an involvement in the review of the legislation, or you're going to be sitting on the back end saying it is not fit. But we are starting to see a lot of these stakeholders come around to actually review and give comments and give their feedback.
While Jamaica, St. Vincent, Barbados, and Antigua raced to legalize cannabis, Saint Lucia took a deliberate path, slower but sturdier. Through the creation of the RSA, extensive consultations with farmers, Rastafarians, and civil society, and a layered law rooted in equity and control, St. Lucia's framework may have come later, but it is broader, fairer, and built to last. At its heart lies a defining feature, the central trading entity for cannabis.
So the CTE sits at the center of the entire industry and recognizes that every single plant propagated in St. Lucia is to be sold to the central trading entity or to pay the central trading entity royalties to bypass the central trading entity. So a foreigner comes in tomorrow with the ability to invest in our cannabis industry. We do not want to prevent these persons from coming into the industry. What we thought was more prudent to say, okay, you already have a market available to you. You already have your own strains and your own proprietary technology. So you can come, and we can, from that, benefit. But we think we should also benefit. So you will be selling your product to a central trading entity, or you will pay that central trading entity for every single crop that you have propagated on this island. The beautiful part of the central trading entity is that it is to be owned, at least 30% of it, by your traditional operators, persons who would have been in the cannabis space. So it allows for, as an individual who is a current cultivator, and we refer to these persons in the legislation as legacy operators.
When we return, Export St. Lucia speaks, Invest St. Lucia speaks, and the Minister of Weed chimes in.
Knowing is the first step. Knowing is confidence. It's a compass guiding you towards medical answers. At Laboratory Services and Consultations Limited, we are in the business of knowing. Knowing where to look and what to look for. And this knowledge guides you and your health provider to your medical answers. We are the focused, precise, and confidential heart of healthcare. The invisible thread binding together all those committed to your well-being. Laboratory Services and Consultations Limited. We focus on results so you can focus on what's important. Need us? Call us. Telephone 459-2200 or visit any of our 10 locations island-wide.
Metals is here, and somebody's day is about to be made forever! David Cox! David Cox! David Cox! David Cox! Money! Money! Yes, son! Come down! Congratulations, Mr. David Cox. You just won yourself $12,000 in the Caribbean Metals Limited quarterly draw. You too can win. All you gotta do is spend $5,000 or more and shop, build, and win. Caribbean Metals Limited. We've got you covered. Guaranteed.
The Cannabis and Industrial Hemp Act is projected to create jobs in cultivation, processing and supporting services while generating revenue through licensing fees, excise taxes and controlled exports. Traditional growers can transition into legal cooperatives, expanding the tax base and formalizing a long-standing informal economy. These measures position cannabis as a regulated economic activity contributing to employment, government revenue and export potential without relying on illicit markets. The question is, are the investment and export agencies in Saint Lucia sufficiently prepared, albeit invested?
Our role is not very well defined at the moment because we have so many complications in the international markets. So we do have to export to another party. Those parties would have their own regulations as it relates to cannabis, and we do not determine what those internal regulations are. So in terms of what Export Saint Lucia would be doing currently, it's research in terms of what markets would most likely work for Saint Lucia, what the regulations potentially could be, and how could our exporters meet those regulations. But that's as far as it would go.
St. Lucia's premier investment promotion agency, Invest St. Lucia, has begun strategically positioning itself to support and attract investment in the emerging cannabis industry.
Many small entrepreneurs, one of the critical factors that deter them is access to finance, access to land, access to factory space. We cannot do all, but the land we can assist, and with the factory space. As far as the exports are concerned, we have to work with agencies like the Export Saint Lucia Limited to work out a mechanism whereby we can assist those who are producing for export. Because our function is not to export, but our function again is the facilitation. So if you're producing and you're having difficulties with export, we'll work with the premier exporting agency in Saint Lucia, which is Export Saint Lucia, which is what you're already doing with many other products, to facilitate that, to ensure that the product gets to the market, that the product is sold. Okay? The European aspect of it, further discussion again has to be held in that regard to ensure that we can target those markets. Europe is broad, cannabis is big in places like Holland and so on, so we can get to those markets, and by doing so, our local producers have a place where they can sell.
Even as cannabis becomes legal, St. Lucia's growers face a roadblock that has nothing to do with fields or factories. It's the banks.
The banking sector needs to be able to trace the funds. And we are working to get a right software as well at the RSA, where we can trace from production to marketing to sales and everything else. And that traceability is extremely important to show that we have clean money going into the banking system.
From an economic point of view, a developmental economics point of view, I'm of the view that the important difference between a poor country and a rich country is its ability to generate livelihoods from its resources. Cannabis is a resource in St. Lucia, and I think, yes, there can be benefits, livelihood benefits to be derived from cultivating, growing cannabis. The Library Credit Union would not have any hesitation in serving as an intermediary, a depositor, in fact accepting deposits from persons who are farming cannabis once we are seeing that everything is in compliance with the laws that govern St. Lucia.
The regime that we have sought to put in place has checks and balances inherent in the process. If you are a cultivator, every plant that you cultivate would be tagged and coded. every pound of cannabis you produce would similarly be accounted for. So when you sell that cannabis, we know for a fact that it's coming from you, and when that is sold to a dispensary and sold to the consuming public thereafter, it is traced throughout so that you can feel confident that, and the bank can similarly feel confident that that is legitimate cannabis product within the legitimate stream and license stream. You will not have individuals outside the space who can come into the legal regime for banking because they would not have been able to benefit from the same traceability software that you can. So as a processor who has received your license and gone through all of the difficulties of meeting those standards, you can feel comforted that, yes, I went through all of these hoops, but now I can sell my product, evidence that it was legally sold, and have that money banked within a financial institution who is similarly confident that that went through the legal process.
Saint Lucia now stands at a crossroads. After decades of criminalization, cultural conflict, and economic suppression, cannabis has finally stepped out of the shadows of fear and hypocrisy. Yet, legalization alone does not erase the scars of the past, nor does it guarantee a just future. The success or failure of this reform will hinge not on lofty promises, but on the grit of execution and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths.
We need to engage our young people to tell them that this is not a free-for-all, that the legislation that we're bringing in is not an open book for any child to pick up marijuana and smoke. No, this is not so. And that is why I continue to say we need a lot of public conversation. And even for the adult, because I'm one who don't support smoking. I've never smoked in my life because of the negative effects. However, we have a plant that has medicinal potential. Even hemp has industrial potential. And as a country, with agriculture, I believe if we do the work right on the ground, that even some of our young men and young women as well, who now shun agriculture, would see the birth of this new industry as bringing them back to agriculture, and not only for the cultivation of hemp or cannabis, but also for the cultivation of vegetables, fruits, and also supporting our food security.
This is not just about planting fields or collecting taxes. It's about dismantling a legacy of prejudice while refusing to create a new one. It's about ensuring that the small farmer, the Rastafarian, the local entrepreneur are not bulldozed by corporate investors or strangled by bureaucracy. It's about facing the hard reality that the legal crop still cannot flow freely through global banks, leaving an industry shackled in cash and risk. And it's about asking whether our agencies, our regulators, and even our culture are truly prepared to make this industry more than a political checkbox or a cash grab. St. Lucia's cannabis framework is built to be deliberate, equitable, and sustainable. But laws are only as strong as those who enforce and adapt them. If regulation becomes red tape, or if equity becomes lip service, this green revolution will wither before it blooms. If, however, we remain willing to challenge the inertia of old systems, demand accountability from new ones, and keep this industry rooted in fairness and transparency and public good, cannabis could become more than a commodity. It could become a catalyst for economic resilience, cultural healing, and national transformation. The choice is ours. Cannabis reform is not the end of the story. It's the test of whether St. Lucia is ready to grow. Not just a new industry, but a new way forward.
The fool has never been told. Who go on and on, the fool has never been told.